Let's get now the insights of our specialists. I want to begin with Bianna Golodryga. We heard the president today repeat his doubts, really, about who was behind the election meddling. He said, I think it was Russia. And then he said, well, no one really knows. I wonder how Vladimir Putin reads that and perhaps takes advantage of a U.S. president who is doubting the judgment of his own intelligence agencies.
Yeah, I would imagine Vladimir Putin was very satisfied after hearing that speech. Remember, Vladimir Putin has gone out and all but confirmed that it was Russia behind the hacking. Remember, he called them patriotic hackers. I think going into this speech, obviously, in this meeting, Vladimir Putin has done his homework. Who knows, maybe he's read The Art of the Deal in Russian. And he's going to bring some of his own statistics that he wants to present to the president. He's going to talk about sort of the history of Ukraine, if that topic does come up. He's going to talk about Crimea and its history with the Russians as well. His last meeting with President Obama was 2 hours. We know this meeting is expected to be some 30 minutes. Other than that, when it comes to Syria, I think we heard from Secretary of State Tillerson sort of confirming that there are areas of agreement in advance of this meeting with so-called safe zones. And I think what really surprised me was that President Trump was denigrating his own intelligence agencies overseas. That is something that is out of President Putin's playbook when it comes to questioning WMD in Iraq. That's something that he said in the past. So I think there's going to be a lot of commonality, specifically when it comes to intelligence communities in the U.S. and also to news and so-called fake news.
Chris Cillizza, President Trump was actually tough on two other Russia-related topics. One, reaffirming the Article 5 of the NATO Charter, also calling out Russia for its actions in Ukraine, Syria. Why the toughness there, but not the willingness to confront Russia when it comes to election meddling?
Good question, Jim. Look, the comments about Russia and election meddling came in Poland as part of a press conference there with the Polish president. The speech that Trump gave after that press conference had a little bit of the affirmation of sort of Western democracies against autocrats, the tough talk at some level directed toward Russia. So it's the difference between Donald Trump off the cuff and Donald Trump scripted. I think, look, I actually thought Donald Trump's speech in Poland, which got less press, certainly, because it's his own fault there, got less press than his press conference, was relatively well crafted and well delivered. Sort of a speech call to arms Western democracies, what we have in common, what makes democracy so unique, so special in the world, worth fighting for, delivered in, I thought, eloquent terms. The problem for Donald Trump is, as you point out, Jim, contradicted somewhat by what he had said earlier, and what he had said earlier, much more inflammatory. A sitting president of the United States on foreign soil, using it as an opportunity to deliver invectives that he delivered on the campaign. The media is bad. There's no, well, maybe Russia did it, but who knows? Lots of people meddle in elections. Not the sort of stuff that we expect from a president, proving yet again, Donald Trump's biggest enemy isn't the so-called fake news media. It's the fact that it's Donald Trump. Donald Trump is Donald Trump's biggest enemy, has been since the day he was sworn in as president.
Phil Mudd, let's talk a little bit about how President Trump is preparing for his meeting with Putin, perhaps how his advisors are preparing him for the meeting. We're told that White House officials have given him very concise materials, a few pages with 1 or 2 sentence talking points. Why that strategy, do you think?
Because the president doesn't like to read, and we've heard this from day one. He said this from day one. I think this is the challenge going into these talks. Let me give you an example. If you're a typical president going into these talks, you mentioned safe zones in Syria. That's not a high-level issue. You can have an agreement in a few minutes with Vladimir Putin. Let's talk about this. But if you want to get into that issue seriously on safe zones in Syria, you have to get into questions like, how do you identify, for example, whether terrorists are using those safe zones, whether American-backed rebels are using those safe zones, and therefore the Syrians want to bomb them. That's a lot of detail work. I don't think the president wants to do that detail work, and I don't think his staff wants him getting there. I think they want him at the level of saying, do you want to have a quick chat with Putin saying, hey, let's let our guys talk a little bit about Syria, get back to us on safe zones, and the president doesn't get into that detail. He doesn't do detail.
As a follow, Putin does do detail, by all accounts, former KGB agent. How is he preparing to meet the president?
I think what you're looking at in this circumstance is he's looking at the areas that the Russians have already discussed with Tillerson and other U.S. representatives, including areas related to the way forward in Syria. And he's determining, in my judgment, whether he can get a high-level agreement where the president says, yeah, that sounds great. Not knowing what the lower-level details are, Putin walks out of the room, says, we agreed to this, and when the real worker bees get to the table and start talking about details, they realize from the American side that they just got boxed in by the president. I'm not worried about the high-level agreement. I'm worried that the Russians are going to play us by coming up with a one-sentence agreement where when we work it out, we realize that their interpretation of that one sentence uttered by the President Putin and our interpretation is fundamentally different. That's where I think the president will get worked.
By the way, Jim, just very quickly, sorry, Bianca, just very quickly, one point to add to Phil's exactly right on point is Donald Trump got elected in a lot of ways because he didn't have any experience. He didn't have elected office experience. He didn't have military experience. First person to be president, not to have either of those. But Putin has been at this a long time. Putin does know exactly sort of both the stagecraft and the policy craft at work here. Trump, not so much. So the inexperience was a huge asset for him in a political context, but in a governing context, it at least exposes him to the possibility of being taken advantage in a sit-down like this with someone who's been at it for a long time like Putin. Sorry about that, Bianca.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say Putin's